Now the Bills training camp in the books at St. John Fisher University, just outside of Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast. A lot of good, some questions moving forward. We got a lot to unpack here on this episode. I'm Kevin Carroll. Welcome aboard once again, everybody.
And I am Andy Young, 2.5 weeks down. Training camp, as Sean McDermott points out, it's not over. It's just switching settings. But for all intents and purposes, we're wrapped up here at St. John Fisher University. All the moving trucks are getting things out. The media colleagues of mine are moving out of the dorm rooms.
Are you the last man out, Andy?
I don't know. I haven't checked out in the hallway in a little while, but I might well be the last one standing. So we'll see. Hopefully I can get this thing done quickly and get out of here. But we're going to give you all we have for the next, 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, we'll do the best we can. We'll talk real fast. We'll get to the point. So we're going to kind of, Andy, get through the good and the bad and some of the questions that remain as the Bills shift their training camp back to the team's facility in Orchard Park with a preseason game coming up against the Chicago Bears on Saturday, and we'll use that as the jumping off point. We always got to talk about Josh Allen and the quarterback and how things are going and the new offense and the new weapons, but one thing we do know, Andy, is that Josh Allen in the healthy starters or the healthy players that look to be regulars on the offense are all going to play about a quarter, according to Sean McDermott, on Saturday against the Bears. And that was one of my points I had going into camp. I thought with all the new weapons and whatnot that the Bills have on offense for Josh Allen to get used to, that it's probably going to be a good idea to get him some game reps with those guys, and Sean McDermott ultimately announcing that that's the decision, at least for the first game.
Yeah, that's right. And McDermott said in his Thursday final day of training camp press conference that some of that is baked into the decision to have the starters play about a quarter. And that goes for the offense and the defense as well. And, of course, everyone's saying, all right, Josh Allen, is he going to play? Well, yes, he is. And he needs some time with those guys out there. Allen, interestingly, said yesterday that it wasn't necessary for him at this point in his career to have to play in the preseason to be okay. But I think with the head coach saying that, we've got so many new faces, especially at the wide receiver position. We've got a new offensive coordinator for all intents and purposes after Joe Brady takes over as the interim. We've got a new defensive coordinator as well. With all the new faces, all the changes, let's let these guys get out there and see the intensity of a game-like atmosphere, get some rapport and camaraderie on the field and see what that looks like. And yeah, maybe Josh Allen plays that quarter, the starters play a quarter, and then they shut it down for the rest of the preseason, because of the last thing you want to do is get Josh Allen hurt. I know some fans are saying, why would you ever put Josh Allen out there at all during the preseason and risk an injury? Because basically, if Josh Allen gets injured long-term in the preseason, you can flush the season down the toilet. But I think they've shown in the past that they're willing to let him play a little bit in the preseason, and he's a guy that's been pretty durable. Rarely has he ever gotten hurt and doesn't miss time really at all since his first couple of seasons. So I think they're willing to risk that. The risk reward is let's get these guys out there acclimated to a game-like atmosphere and then, shut it down after that.
Yeah, I know there's worry always, with every team about their stars, especially quarterbacks getting injured in a preseason game that doesn't mean much. I know there's a big push not to even have preseason games if they extend the schedule eventually, Andy. But I have always been, no matter what, a guy who is big on at least getting some reps for everybody during the preseason to get used to, as Sean McDermott said, getting warmed up on the field, getting used to coming out of the tunnel, getting used to the crowd. We know they do some of that with their return of the blue and the red scrimmage / practice thing, but I just think it's good. I'm in the camp that is of the belief that you need to get everyone some reps, and as you said, risk reward. I think it's good, even if there were a lot more familiar faces on the offense, for Josh Allen to at least get out there, safe plays. Am I right, Andy? Hand the ball off a couple of times, try a slant route to somebody and maybe a deep pass and then call it a day.
Yeah, and you're not game planning for a game like this, so it's not exactly the same as a regular season game where so much is opponent specific. This is, let's trot our guys out there. Let's trot a Keon Coleman out there who's never played in an NFL regular season game or preseason game for that matter. Let's have Josh Allen take a couple of snaps from his new center, Connor McDermott, in a game atmosphere. Let's work out a couple of little kinks and make some mistakes out there. It's okay. Don't get anybody hurt. That's the main goal. But let these guys ramp up a little bit. I wouldn't have been shocked if they said Josh Allen's not playing at all, although past reference has shown that they usually do trot him out there a little bit. But I wouldn't have minded if they said he's not playing in the preseason. Some teams take that tact, take that method, take that approach to the preseason. But under Sean McDermott, they have typically let Josh play a little bit, sometimes a little more than we'd expect. So we'll see how this plays out throughout the preseason. I personally wouldn't play him anymore after this first game, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and McDermott said that he's going to take it one game at a time, Andy, but I have a sneaking suspicion that this is the one game. I think last year I believe they did it the second preseason game. He didn't play in the first. This year, I think this is it. With all these new guys in place, get Josh Allen out there a little bit. And you're right, Andy. There was a preseason game. I can't remember what year, but Josh Allen and the starters were going to play a quarter. They played the entire first half.
Yeah, and I think that, they like to do it at home, too. Right. Let Josh and the starters get out there in front of the home crowd and experience that noise and that sort of thing, and the atmosphere and the energy that it takes to get up for a game at home. Give the fans something to cheer about. Preseason games, those fans, man, they pay full price for those games, and they are not an NFL regular season game. We'll put it that way. The owners make out on that deal. So, I would love to see the preseason go away altogether. They don't have it in college football. They don't really have it in high school. Yeah, you might scrimmage somebody, and that's your choice. You don't need a preseason. We saw in 2020 with COVID. Remember that year? No preseason. The Bills' offense looked as best it probably ever has in the team's history coming out in that 2020 season. So I don't think you need it, although a few reps here or there won't hurt, so long as you don't get anybody big-time hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that COVID season, you're right. You forget about that. They came out like gangbusters, and that offense was just rolling during that COVID season. Of course, Stephon Diggs on the team during the COVID season. Josh Allen, Andy, one more time, he's been asked this repeatedly since Stephon Diggs was moved to the Houston Texans about life without Stephon Diggs. So this coming at the end of his first training camp in 4 years without the star wide receiver there and your number one wide receiver. And he was asked if he missed Stephon Diggs. And with like a little wry smile, he replies, I wouldn't say miss him. We're going to miss his production. I took it as a slight dig at Stephon Diggs that, the Bills weren't going to fall apart without Stephon Diggs here. And Josh Allen, and we can get into this in a bit, saying that the team has developed their offensive identity while they were out at Fisher.
I mean, at a certain point, Allen has endlessly heaped praise on Stephon Diggs. Sean McDermott has heaped praise on Stephon Diggs. Brandon Beane has done the same thing after Diggs' departure and saying, my gosh, he's been a great player. You don't replace that guy. You just do what you can. I mean, he was a guy that led them to some of the best success in franchise history and was one of the best receivers in franchise history over that 4-year period. However, these guys are ready to move on. I think there was a reason that the Bills decided to move on from Stephon Diggs, and we've rehashed this over and over again through a number of podcasts. But yeah, you're right. It keeps coming up because it keeps being asked. And he was asked pointedly, at any point throughout this process, Josh Allen, have you missed Stephon Diggs? And he said, I wouldn't say missed. And then he kind of circled back around to, he was reliable and a great player for us, but I like what we have and the guys we have. And then And on another question, he and this may not be directly related to it, but it kind of comes all together. He said that there's a different vibe to this team this season, and maybe some of the pressure's off. Maybe that's because they're not looked at as a Super Bowl favorite right now. They're still probably going to be a pretty darn good team, but as far as like analysts and everybody around the world saying that, they're front runners for the Super Bowl, that isn't there this season. And maybe it has something to do with Diggs and some of the other people that have left. I don't know. But Allen does say it's a different family-like atmosphere this year, and that could be just because they're back to having that plucky underdog chip on their shoulder, which I think this team in particular has done a little better with that than they have as front runners.
All right, we're at the 10-minute mark right now, Andy. Do you want to end the podcast now, or should we keep going?
I got some packing to do, so we can wrap this up.
And I think we touched it. No, we'll keep moving on, Andy. Yeah, hopefully.
No, we're good, man. We're going to go as long as we need to here.
We're keeping you there for a bit, but hopefully this is the last time Diggs' name is brought up, but I highly doubt it because they have a game with the Houston Texans during the regular season. Let's talk about some of these new wide receivers there. And, Andy, we'll keep the up-and-comers and some of the surprises to the side for a little bit and just talk about Keon Coleman showing up. His rookie season looked super impressive during training camp. Curtis Samuel looks the part. Khalil Shakir, I don't even think we have to talk about Khalil Shakir. He's the Khalil Shakir. And then, Mac Hollins, who's a bit banged up right now. But those guys will use that as the jumping off point off of the semi-depth chart that they released the other day after Joe Brady said there's no depth chart, and I ran with that soundbite, and that killed me that he said that. But at any rate, Andy, it seems like the adjustment's there. We're not going to say they're going to go out and be the Rams of the late 90s and be the greatest show on turf, but it looks like the connection and the bond, and as Josh Allen said, the identity is forming.
Yeah, I think all those guys have shown some capabilities at different points throughout training camp. We've seen, you mentioned Keon Coleman first, and we'll start there because he was their de facto first-round pick, and he's come out and done well. I mean, at the line of scrimmage, he's not a Stephon Diggs or a Cole Beasley type player with that shake at the line where they can get free or, leave a guy, with his jockstrap laying on the turf and breaking ankles out there. He's more of a physical presence. So there's times where he might struggle a little bit to get separation, but in that physical contact, because he doesn't break away from guys as much, he's able to go up and make some nice catches. He shows his athleticism, his body control. Josh Allen has shown some trust in him to kind of just throw it up there. And he's mentioned Mac Hollins in this vein too, and I think they're similar in that they play the same position, most typically that X receiver, which is that Gabe Davis role in the past. He's willing to he can't throw the ball up high enough for those guys. So we've seen some of that from Keon Coleman. I do think he's made some rookie mistakes. You'll see a little bit of miscommunication from time to time where it looks like maybe Josh was expecting him to run one way and Keon ran the other, that sort of thing. That's to be expected. That takes time to develop. I think he's been what he's advertised. I don't know that he's ever going to be like, a 1,500-yard, 100-catch, 12-touchdown kind of receiver in the league, but I think he's going to be a good player, and I think there's some reason for optimism there. This offense is going to be a little bit unpredictable, and Josh Allen alluded to that yesterday in that they have so many guys who have so many different specialized roles that you don't know exactly what you're getting if you're an opponent defense coming out this season as to what to expect and how they're going to use those guys. I mean, you know about Shakir and you know about Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox and James Cook, but beyond that, receiver-wise, you don't know a whole lot exactly how they're going to do. So it's been interesting to see that Curtis Samuel lines up in the backfield sometimes, and he even takes running back snaps at times during training camp practice. And we've seen Mac Hollins make plays. We've seen MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, start to come on as training camp has continued. He did have a really nice catch today on a deep pass, also dropped one in the deep seam as well. So that's kind of been Marquez Valdez-Scantling in a nutshell in his career. He's got a less than 50% catch rate. But it's going to be interesting to see who those final couple of receivers are, because it's wide open for those couple of spots. And we didn't even mention Tyrell Shavers yet, who Sean McDermott has again praised over and over again about his consistency, and then today brought up his special teams play. So when someone says this guy's been consistent at receiver and he made a great special teams play, that tells me they're taking a real hard look at keeping Tyrell Shavers on the roster.
So we talked about going into training camp how many wide receivers they might keep on the roster. Is it trending towards 7 right now? We mentioned Marquez Valdez-Scantling. You just mentioned Tyrell Shavers. If you had one of those little emojis of trending up, you got that there. KJ Hamler, Andy, also a wide receiver, punt returner, and kick returner right now. When they release that depth chart, he's the number 1 guy at that position right now, and he's done well catching the ball. So I don't know, man. I think we could be looking at, and there are other questions the offense is going to have to address on the positive side too. And we can talk about Zach Davidson, the tight end, Andy, who's making a case for himself as well. But stick with KJ Hamler, making a strong case for himself that he will be part of the 53-man.
You know, that's interesting, because I had thought that they might be leaning towards Daquan Hardy, who's the rookie out of Penn State, who's a cornerback. And he's gotten some run at the return positions as well, and has played fairly well when he's been pressed in at cornerback. But KJ Hamler is a guy that is a former second-round pick of the Denver Broncos. Injuries have really hampered his career, and he's never really been able to put it together. But I asked Sean McDermott about him directly today, because we did see him on their first unofficial depth chart as the number 1 kick returner and the number 1 punt returner. Of course, this is a day where he's a little banged up as well, and they were evaluating him, and they want to see exactly if he'll be able to play in the preseason game on Saturday. But McDermott mentioned his speed and mentioned that he's done a nice job out there. So that's a position where if he's someone who can compete to be that 6th or 7th wide receiver, maybe a backup slot receiver, maybe that's a possibility. It's really interesting to see how this is all going to shake out, because there's been some talk, as you mentioned, about 4 tight ends. Okay, well, you want to keep 4 tight ends. Well, you're not keeping 7 wide receivers, I don't think, right? Because then you're taking away from a linebacker or a safety or a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman for that matter. So there are some very interesting decisions at the back half of the roster here. Zach Davidson, like you mentioned, he's one of those guys who's like 6'7", number 84. Kind of reminds you of looks-wise of Scott Chandler, former Bills tight end that played during the drought era. He's a bigger, faster target than I think Chandler was. But, you know, Josh Allen said that Bean's decision is going to be difficult there, because Davidson's done so well. And he's listed at 4th on the depth chart behind Quentin Morris as the number 3 tight end, Dawson Knox as the number 2, and, of course, Dalton Kincaid as the Bills' number 1 tight end. So that'll be interesting, too. If they're really going after playing more 2 tight end sets, maybe they do want to keep 4 tight ends, and that's all also going to depend on special teams, as it always does at the back half of the roster.
You've been out there. Did he just come on strong? It seemed like started to hear more and more about him as training camp progressed.
I mean, he's not a guy that's had a ton of reps with the first team at all, but he's just kind of constantly making plays with the second and third teams. And he's kind of a loud guy. He likes to dance and celebrate, and Josh Allen has joked about that. So he's made the most of his opportunities when he's been out there. I haven't seen him really get a whole lot of run with the first team, so if you're gauging it by that, no. But he's done well with what he's been pressed into.
Any other standouts on offense? Any names that, you know, the average person might not be aware of that you've seen kind of make a statement to make the 53-man roster?
I mean, I don't think this was unexpected to make the roster, but I really do think Ray Davis is going to have a nice role for this team. The 4th-round rookie running back out of Kentucky, also played at Vanderbilt and also played at I believe, Temple. So he's a guy who constantly gets play, whether that's with the first team, the second team, or the third team. They really have run him out there a lot. And I think he's going to have a nice role, especially with Ty Johnson hurt, as the backup to James Cook, at least for the interim. And they're not afraid to throw him the football. He's got a little burst inside. Maybe he can take a little bit of the pressure off Josh Allen in the short yardage situations. They've been looking for that guy. I mean, you go back to what they had last year, bringing in the player from New England whose name escapes me, the running back, and who ended up getting hurt. And they bring in Leonard Fournette and Latavius Murray. I think they're looking for a guy. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's got some physicality, he's got some speed, and he's got some ability in the passing game as well. So I think Ray Davis is a name that you're going to want to watch because he's going to get some run for the Bills this year.
You mentioned James Cook, so we'll hit the concerns on offense right now, Andy. A bit of trouble holding on to the ball, James Cook, during training camp. Is that a big concern?
It's a little bit of a concern. I wouldn't say it's a massive concern because he's your starting running back. He is going to be a big factor in this offense. But much like last season, he has had some issues with either fumbles or drops here during training camp, more than you'd like to see. Once in a while, it's fine, but he's had some practices where he's had multiple times putting the ball on the turf. So that's something he's really got to hone in on because we saw last season. Think about Philadelphia or Kansas City or different games where it looked like he had surefire touchdowns and drops them, right? So whether that's fumbling the ball while he has it or doesn't bring it in to begin with, it's something to keep an eye on, and it is mildly concerning through training camp that maybe that wasn't fixed for whatever reason.
Eagles drop. I think he had a big drop in the Dolphins game at the end of the season, too. Here you go, Andy. Damian Harris was the running back from New England.
I hate that because I pride myself on knowing all these players, and it was escaping my mind at the moment. But Damian Harris, I see that Ray Davis role as what they looked for Damian Harris last season before he was injured.
Side note, I did not look that up while you were talking. I just kept going through who the players were last year. Connor McGovern at center, Andy. That was talked about going into camp. There was a little concern about the QB center exchange at the beginning of training camp. How has that progressed? Should we feel better about that situation at this point? Or do we, like you said, need to see that in a game situation against the Bears this weekend?
It's really interesting because I remember we all oohed and ahed and kind of took a look at the Bills' offense absolutely dominating the defense from the very first practice. And that has shifted back to more of a middle ground as training camp went on. Josh Allen and the offense were tearing up the defense, scoring at will. But I noticed that very first practice of training camp, a lot of the snaps were low. Josh was picking them up either right off the ground or off his shoelaces and then making the play. And then there's been a couple of other instances where the ball was low or hit the ground or an under center snap. There was an exchange, a bobble, and they lost the football there. So it was brought up, and it's been a concern, I think, from head coach Sean McDermott. And he said, look, that's something they've got to work out. And I think it's gotten a little bit better over the last week, the last little stretch of training camp here. Haven't noticed it as much, haven't really written that down in my notes as an issue as I've watched 11-on-11 practices. So I think they're getting that straightened out. More and more reps certainly help there. As a former offensive lineman, I can attest to when you take some snaps for center, different guys do it a little differently. And so they've got to get used to that, and that's something they've got to figure out because Josh Allen had Mitch Morse for so long. They've got to develop exactly that rapport. How fast does the ball come up? What's the angle? That sort of thing. Where does Josh like it? And Connor McGovern, bottom line, has to get the ball up when he's snapping in shotgun because it can't be rolling on the ground. That's problematic.
Yeah. Any other things on offense, Andy, maybe that is something to keep an eye on as we hit the preseason that might need a little bit more work?
I just wonder a little bit about the offense against man coverage.
Okay.
Who's going to be their guy who, when teams are sending that blitz and they're in zero coverage or man coverage on the outside, who's going to beat that? Who's going to be able to shake their guy and get open? That'll be interesting. I mean, I think Kincaid has some ability there if he's matched up one-on-one with either a safety or a linebacker. I think Shakir's got some shake. I think Samuel's got some shake. I mentioned I don't think Keon Coleman is a great separator, so that doesn't play into man coverage beating that way very good. Although if you see him line up maybe as a big slot sometimes or on the outside and running slants where he can just body a guy, that might be helpful too. But I do have some concerns about who their guys are who can beat man coverage, because like Steph Diggs was a great player at that. I mean, he was great at finding the soft spot in the zone too. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that as far as – and then I didn't see a ton of this either during camp, and maybe it's just because they didn't want to show it, but not a whole lot of deep balls down the field. So I'm wondering where that's going to come from. And maybe they're going to rely more on rack and run after catch, yards after catch, and letting their guys make plays in space as opposed to like throwing the ball deep downfield, where Josh Allen, for as great as an arm as he has, hasn't always been so on target with those throws. And like last year, even when he was, there was that big drop against Kansas City from Stephon Diggs. So it'll be interesting to see how much they utilize the deep ball as opposed to other aspects of their passing game.
So mostly good news outweighing the bad as far as we look at the Bills offense at this stage in the game and the development as they get ready for the preseason. So
just a lot of unknowns, Kevin. Like, we just don't know till we see it out there.
Right. But what we're starting to know, Andy, and you can get into this as we switch to the other side of the ball, we'll get into Von Miller and Matt Milano, but let's start with Von Miller, who, you know, the concerns were where's he at going into training camp, and as training camp progressed, the pads came on, you saw a lot more pep from Von Miller than you did at any point last season. And Miller coming out of training camp looking like he's in a pretty good space right now, Andy, as far as where he wanted to be as opposed to where he was all of last season.
Yeah, and that was pretty evident right from mostly the start of training camp. Obviously, last training camp, he was not a participant. He was kind of working off to the side and just trying to get right and get healthy. You saw as training camp went on, Miller show a little more explosiveness, a little more disruptiveness, that bend around the corner that allows him to get low and get that leverage and sweep around some of the bigger offensive tackles. You saw a little more of that. Now, Father Time, we don't know exactly how that's going to play out for him at 35 years old. But as far as the injury goes, he says he feels good. He doesn't have to think about it anymore, and he's in a good space mentally and physically to where he feels like he's going to go out there and make big-time plays. If he can, that's huge for the Bills. Even if they use him as a situational pass rusher and don't rely on him a ton on first and second down, which is a possibility, or they could use him a lot. We'll see, because we know they like to rotate their defensive linemen, and that includes Von Miller coming off the edge. If he's in a good place and can create 8 to 10 sacks for him, that's huge because they need that production, especially after losing Leonard Floyd in free agency.
Yeah, it's weird to look at that unofficial depth chart and see Von Miller listed as part of the second string with A.J. Epinesa and Gregory Rousseau ahead of him, but that's just where it is right now. I mean, maybe during the season, Von Miller gets in a groove and he starts playing more, but you're right. I mean, they always have done that rotation anyways.
And I don't think it really matters exactly who's going to be the starter. I mean, different games call for different game plans and different usage, and week to week, different guy might be on the field. I think you're probably going to see the most out of Epinesa and the most out of Greg Rousseau of anybody, but you're also going to see Von Miller. You're going to see DeJuan Smoot, who I think has made a nice push and probably surprisingly to some is going to have a pretty locked up roster spot here, at least in my opinion.
Got it.
As, you know, a fourth, possibly fifth defensive end. But yeah, I mean, that's a unit that still does have a little bit of question because of Vaughn and because we've never really seen Epinesa and Greg Rousseau take that next step to like elite status. And that's where they kind of need one of those guys at least to get to be really effective in their pass rush.
Matt Milano back as well, so we'll jump over to the middle linebacker there. And that was another big question mark on how he would be, how he would feel out there, his movements to look at. And another positive, because we thought, or at least I thought, maybe they would do the slow ramp up with Matt Milano. He does get a couple of veteran days off, but why not at this point? But so far, he looks like he's on track for a nice return.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect him to, unless short of a setback, to miss any time in the regular season from recovering from his past injury. And I think throughout camp, he's kind of shown he's going to be Matt Milano. I mean, there's been times where I think some video went around where he kind of flexes his knee and takes a look at it. I think that's him kind of just getting a feel for what he's got there and how it's going to feel for him. But I noticed even yesterday, and I think I wrote about it in my observations article on SpectrumLocalNews.com, that Milano has done a great job of flashing those instincts and that explosiveness and that quickness to get to the football that he always had. Just such a knack to getting to the ball carrier or creating turnovers or creating havoc. He read a swing pass from Josh Allen to James Cook and was there in a heartbeat and stopped it either in the backfield or right near the line of scrimmage. I couldn't tell from my vantage point, but he was there in a heartbeat and snuffed out that play. And we've seen quite a bit of that, him stuffing the run and getting to some screen passes and all those sorts of things, and dropping back in his zone defense, which the Bills are known for. I think he looks pretty darn good, and I think Bills fans can be pretty excited about the prospects of Matt Milano being at least close to the player that he was before that devastating injury.
Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard out there, that they were becoming a force to reckon with last season before Milano went down in England.
Yeah, they certainly were, like a real nice 1-2 punch of athletic linebackers. I mean, we saw Terrell Bernard have a really nice second season when that was a big question. How would he replace Tremaine Edmonds? And he filled in really well in that spot, created a lot of big plays, had some sacks, some turnovers, and that was mostly without Matt Milano.
Right.
So to get those two guys together, that'll be really fantastic. And I think it's kind of lost on people, and maybe some people forget this, but to not have Bernard at 100% and playing in the playoffs against the Chiefs, I mean, you could see it. It just wasn't there for the Bills' backup linebackers, and Kelsey ate them up, right?
Still amazing how many defensive injuries they were dealing with during the playoffs.
Right. So to have those two guys healthy on paper is going to be huge because they're two of the more athletic linebacker duos that are able to both play and run and stay on the field for passing in the NFL.
Would it be, wow, my voice just cracked. Would it be a fair statement?
13-year-old Kevin Carroll is back.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me.
There he is. Deep voice, Kevin.
Kyer Elam, Andy. Would it be fair to say he's probably not going to be the 1 or 2 cornerback, but he did trend up during training camp as far as what we had seen from him in the past and what we're seeing from him now, and maybe an increased role in the Bills' defense?
Yeah, I think Elam really took a big jump throughout training camp, throughout the spring, and he continued that into camp. And Sean McDermott said, look, he worked really tirelessly to perform at his best. And I think the change of cornerbacks coaches has really helped him. It's a clean slate, a fresh voice in that room, and somebody that didn't come in with any preconceived notions about what Kyer Elam could do. And he's done really well. I think he's locked up that third cornerback spot. And I think if he's pressed to play, I don't think the Bills are super fearful of his inconsistencies. That's always kind of been the knock on him. You'd see him like make an interception, but the play before that, he'd have blown coverage or get a holding call or an interference call, and that's kind of been the knock on Kaiir Elam, was that consistency, that play-to-play reliability, and I think he's moved closer to that throughout this process. And I think if you're looking at the Bills roster long-term, he and Christian Benford are both in their third seasons coming out of the same draft class. Benford has developed into a really nice, reliable starting cornerback for the Buffalo Bills. He doesn't have the athletic traits that Kaiir Elam does, but he's usually in the right place and really understands the defense, and he's incredibly consistent. Rasul Douglas came on. Go ahead, Kevin, if you want to jump in there.
I was just going to say, as far as Kaiir Elam, what we've seen, you can easily sum up what you had from Kaiir Elam to this point in the playoff game against the Steelers with a pass interference to get the Steelers into the red zone and then an interception on the following play. And you go from get him out of there to, oh, my God, that's a great interception. And that's Kaiir Elam in a nutshell up to this point.
Yeah, so piggybacking off that, Rasul Douglas comes in midseason trade and does really well. But he is going to be a free agent. So if the Bills decline to sign him or it doesn't work out, if they can get Kaiir Elam up to speed and go into next season with Elam and Benford, that's pretty nice. And then potentially the fifth-year option on Elam if he really can perform. So from a roster standpoint, that answers a big question if he's available to be at least the number 3 corner and trusted if Benford or Douglas goes down, or their play precipitates that and Elam goes in at that point. If he's serviceable in that area, that's a major question of Brandon Beane's regime knocked off, because a whole lot of people, especially when he couldn't get on the field at all last year dealing with injuries and healthy scratches, were thinking that guy was a bust.
And sometimes your favorite number does the trick. Back to number 5, got rid of the 24. I'm superstitious when it came to my number in any sport. Still am to this day, but maybe that gives that little extra oomph, Andy.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Mambo number 5 for Kaiir Elam.
So we'll stay with the defensive backfield. Now some of the concerns with that defensive backfield, the injuries just piling up at the safety position throughout training camp. So what you thought was a rookie coming in that might have an immediate impact, he's banged up, he's missing time. And then the other guy you brought,
Mike Edwards.
I was going to say Mike Williams. You say Mike Williams, you have a chance at getting it right. Mike Edwards,
Who?
Andy.
Mike Jones. No, Mike Edwards. Certain people understand that Mike Jones reference.
Yeah, I understand it. But yeah, Mike Edwards comes over. He's been banged up he's banged up in the spring and then banged up at training camp. But you do have Damar Hamlin has turned some heads at training camp.
Yeah, the safety thing is concerning because going into the spring, and Sean McDermott flat out said this, that their plan was for Mike Edwards and probably Taylor Rapp to be their starters. Mike Edwards, who has Super Bowl rings with Kansas City and Tampa Bay, wasn't a full-time starter for Kansas City, but started throughout the playoffs and did pretty well for them in leading to a Super Bowl last season. But he never really was able to get on the field because he had off-season surgery, was recovering from that, couldn't get out there during the spring, comes to training camp, then hurts his hamstring after a few practices, and he's week to week. And then obviously Cole Bishop, the rookie, it's tough to, make yourself a starter as a rookie in the NFL at safety because that's one of the tougher positions. And so he's week to week with a shoulder injury, and we'll see how much that hampers him. So Damar Hamlin, who, without those things happening, did get the first starter's reps on the very first day of practice and then rotated throughout, has since those injuries just been the guy next to Taylor Rapp. Hamlin said that he is, quote, and he said this to me, "I'm effing starving, hungry to prove that I can be a serviceable player in this league and can be a starter," because he went through so much We've been down that road with him. We know about his cardiac arrest and all he went through on and off the field last season just to be able to play the game that, for all intents and purposes, killed him on the field.
Right.
I think mentally he's moved past that. You'll never fully get past that. But he's ready to be a contributor, and he's done well out there for the most part. He's been in the right positions. He's been consistent. He's made some plays. We see him work on special teams as well. And I think right now, because of those injuries, odds are you're going to see Damar Hamlin as your week 1 starter at safety opposite Taylor Rapp.
Much depth at the safety position. I know they brought in a couple of players.
Yeah, that's the interesting part about the Bills' safety position is because they've had so many injuries, they've had to bring in some guys. So, you look at the Bills' depth chart. Let me pull it up here very briefly as I vamp a little bit. So you're looking at the safety position. Right now they have Cam Lewis listed as the backup to Taylor Rapp, and they have Cole Bishop still listed as the backup to Damar Hamlin. They brought in Kareem Jackson. They brought in Terrell Burgess. They have Dee Delaney and Kendall Williamson. So those guys have been working in the back half of the roster. So to me, the depth just really isn't there, but Kareem Jackson's a veteran guy, and he's kind of worked his way in. I think he's 36 years old. So you'd think if in a pinch they need him to play, that's at least someone who's been serviceable. Terrell Burgess has been a player in the league. Williamson, Delaney as well. So the depth isn't there right now, but the hope is, I think from the Bills' perspective, that you can get these guys in both Mike Edwards and Cole Bishop cleared for week 1. Whether they're starters or not, or can play that very first game, that's a different story. But then, pretty quickly you get them back on the field, at least as backups, and then your depth concerns aren't as bad. So they've got some time here. We're still, more than a month away from the regular season opener. So I think that is time's on their side.
Yeah.
They've already been out a week or two. If they're week to week, you'd hope by, the opener that they could be good to go. They might not be ready to be starters just because they've missed so much time, but they could come in a pinch, and I think that's important.
Absolutely. Tyler Bass, going off of social media is what I'm going off of here. Is there a concern? It seems like anytime someone is mentioning Tyler Bass, it's not good.
Sean McDermott said that today, I think he mentioned it, that he thinks Tyler Bass is in a good rhythm.
Okay.
And so that's a positive thing. I think the other day he was pretty steady on his field goal kicking from what I watched. I don't chart it and track it like some of the beat reporters do. That's just not my thing. But I think for McDermott to come out on, no one asked him specifically about Tyler Bass. I think he was asked just a general question about players he's been impressed with throughout camp, and he mentioned Tyler Bass is in a good rhythm. And also that during the preseason game that you might see Bass maybe kick a field goal in spots where McDermott in a regular season game might go for it, just to give them the reps and give those guys the rhythm and
I get it.
a chance to continue that during a preseason game. So I'm not super concerned about Tyler Bass. I don't think the Bills are at this point. And, obviously he missed a couple of big kicks last season, but I think he's trying to put that behind him, and I think they're going to be okay there.
Need to have Tyler Bass in a good headspace as a kicker. So you have Bills hosting the Bears Saturday, 1 o'clock, Highmark Stadium, which I wrote New Era Field in one of the stories I was doing the other day. I can't believe that slipped in.
I can. It's not surprising. Some people still call it Rich Stadium.
I think my dad does, as a matter of fact. Bobby Babich will be calling the defense. That was something we talked about going in, what we would see from it. This seems more of a let's see how Bobby fares, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, and you know what? I think this was starting to become more formality because to me it appeared, watching practice, that it was Babich calling the plays most often defensively. I think McDermott can always go back to that if he feels it's necessary. He still, I think, designed this defense, and it's his baby. Mm-hmm. But I think he wants to give Babich the runway and the space to go out there and do this. You hire a guy as your defensive coordinator, you want him to call the plays, especially when you're a veteran head coach like this. On the defensive side of the ball, it's a little easier if you're on offense to be the play caller and the head coach. Defense, it's a little tougher because if you want to go talk to your guys, make adjustments, those sort of things, well, your offense is on the field, especially in those situations where, hey, do I need to challenge? Do I need to take a timeout here? Clock management, all those things. So if McDermott's able to delegate that to Babich and give him the space and the runway to be able to call the plays, that just lets McDermott be more of the executive and take an overarching look at the game and game management.
What are we looking to take away then from the game against the Bears? Are we looking for the offense to just come out and look good? Scores don't matter. Maybe even Mitch Trubisky popped into my head. I think when he was a backup years back, his first preseason game was a disaster. From what I can remember, Matt Barkley came in and then lit it up, and everyone was like, maybe just move on from Trubisky. He's now back, familiar with how things are done here. I mean, to me, maybe that's one of the bigger things other than just to see that the first units look crisp.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's going to want to see how Allen and that first unit looks offensively. If they play a quarter, does that mean they get maybe 2 series, right? Depending on how the flow of the quarter goes. You're not going to glean a ton from that, but what does the offense maybe look like a little bit? You know, does he show that he's got some reliable targets? How is that going to look? Another cool thing to think about is how are those 6th, 7th, 8th wide receivers going to play, even if they're playing with Trubisky or Shane Buechele in reserve roles after that? Who stands out from that perspective? And then also who stands out from the wide receiver groups on special teams and where that figures in? Because, I mean, we talked about it right off the top. Are they going to keep 7 wide receivers? I thought maybe they could, even going into training camp. We'll see. These preseason games are going to do a lot to help shake that out. And then it's just generally like, how does the kickoff or how does the new kickoff format look? Like, that's going to be pretty cool to see. And how does some of these depth players on defense look? And the second offensive line unit, what's that going to look like? Because there are some unproven, untested players there as well. So there's still a whole lot you can glean from it if you're like hardcore Bills sports fan, like you want to know everybody on the roster and exactly what strengths they have.
Right.
There's a lot in the preseason that can be fun. If you're like looking for the offense to light it up and be out there all day, well, you know, this is probably not the game for you.
I believe I heard that the Bears will be playing Caleb Williams in this game.
It sounds like their starters are going to play, at least some, and that's pretty cool to see the first overall pick in the draft.
Yeah.
Line it up against Josh Allen, who's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And a lot of people are super high on the Bears offense because of all the skill players they have. And to have DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and, you know, you draft a wide receiver with the 9th overall pick and you do all those things and you bring in the first overall pick in Caleb Williams, a lot of people are high on the Chicago Bears. So, you know, that'll be interesting to see how they look too. So there's some juice to this one.
All right. Time for a little 3 and out. I know we kept you over 10 minutes, but we'll try to get through this quick, which we never do, Andy. You mentioned some guys to see. Will you watch other preseason football games? Because I'm thinking of players like Caleb Williams. As we record this, the Patriots play the Carolina Panthers. Interesting if you're a Bills fan to see what Drake May looks like for the Patriots, because from reports I've seen out of New England, he did not have the best training camp.
I mean, I'll flick through the channels, and if I realize that like people are tweeting about a game that's on, I might look for it. I'm not going to sit and seek out like watching an entire Panthers-Patriots game in the preseason. I mean, time is so fleeting now with being on the Bills beat full time that, like, you know, I have hardly been home, and we're going to turn around and go to Pittsburgh for 4 days for the joint practice and preseason game there too. So, I mean, I'll watch a little bit of preseason, but I'm not going to be super focused on other teams. I think sometimes it's fun to get a look at that stuff if you're into fantasy football, because
Yeah, that's a good
a
point.
sleeper guy, that kind of thing. So maybe I'll do a little of that too.
How about the Olympics? I'm getting a feeling a big no for you on the Olympics. I did watch the golf. Scotty Scheffler's comeback to win Olympic gold. Pretty incredible. John Rahm with the big collapse. Other than that, being my hours with it over in Paris, I'm at work right when everything starts in the morning, and I've watched race walking. I watched ping pong this morning. The swimming's been on a lot. But as far as just locking into any Olympic event, I know you like the basketball. I've just watched the golf.
Yeah, I mean, I know what your morning schedule is like, and even though you're at work, you can probably watch a little bit of the Olympics there.
I watch a lot of it, Andy. Make no mistake about it. From 3 in the morning until 5, it's a madhouse here.
Right. My wife likes to watch the Olympics. She likes to just, put on NBC's coverage in the evenings. So I'll watch whatever's on if, we're hanging out on the couch or whatever. A little bit of swimming, gymnastics, but I've not been super, super focused on it, especially in the last week with training camp cooking. Just been busy and haven't really watched it. But, on those occasional days off, I don't have a TV here in the dorm room at St. John Fisher. So I mostly just scroll the phone at night and go to bed and wake up and do it all over again in the morning.
Load up anything on Netflix as we get to what you watching before we head out, Andy?
No Netflix, but I have been watching House of the Dragon.
Okay, we're still there. Okay.
The spin-off of Game of Thrones, super popular series. I think the second season here is kind of slow moving for a lot of people, but I actually read the books, so I kind of know what's coming, and it's interesting to see how they change from the book to the TV show. So that's been my my vice of watching TV on my phone here while at camp or on the computer. I'll pull up, our Spectrum Online or HBO Max.
I started watching this series called Hacks. Ask me what it is and why I'm watching it.
It's about television sports anchors in the twilight of their career.
I can be pretty hacky, Andy.
I'm kidding, buddy. I have no idea. Is it about hacky sack?
No, it's about bad stand-up comics.
Okay.
It's basically about an aging female comic out in Las Vegas, and they hire a younger female comic to help punch up some of her jokes. Now, one of the agents or the hotel owner or the casino owner is played by one Chris McDonald.
Very nice.
Chris McDonald.
I know where you're going with this.
Chris McDonald played the legendary Shooter McGavin in Happy Gilmore, among other parts, but he's also a huge Bills fan and is going to be in town for Jim Kelly's celebrity golf outing that takes place in Batavia, and he is going to stop by and join us on a special episode of the Buffalo End Zone podcast coming up on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, Andy. So Shooter McGavin in studio here with us, and I can't wait because there's plenty to talk about with the Bills. There's Happy Gilmore, and Andy, I dove way back to when I was a kid because he has played the jerk in so many roles that I found, and I totally blanked that he was the bad guy, and I don't even know if you know this movie. There was a breakdancing movie called Breakin' in the early 80s.
Okay.
And he was the snobby rich boyfriend who objected to all this breakdancing. So we're going to have a lot of fun. So that's going to be Tuesday right here at 10 o'clock. We're looking forward to that.
That'll be cool because, I mean, I don't know him personally at all, but I bumped into him at the Jim Kelly golf outing, and he seems like a genuinely nice guy, but always plays the jerk in his roles. So that's really cool.
Right, and he knows that's, from what I've seen from other interviews with him, he's well aware that he's there because he's Shooter.
Right, that's awesome. Looking forward to that. What's the first question you're going to ask him?
I was going to say, I thought we were getting Chris O'Donnell From Party of Five. Wasn't he in Party of Five?
Oh, and here we go, as we always do, off the rails.
No, I don't know. I'm going to sit on it over the weekend.
All right, cool. Yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be a lot of fun to have him on the podcast. And I think, we can tell our viewers this and our listeners this. That's kind of one of the goals and initiatives that we're going to have on the Buffalo End Zone podcast, is to kind of involve some of those celebrity Bills fans. And we've reached out to a number of them, and people are on board. So more to come on that throughout the season. But I think that's going to be a nice little add-on feature of some of the Buffalo End Zone podcasts, and maybe a separate podcast altogether of, like, who are some of these folks in Hollywood and news and journalism and sports that are big Bills fans, and why they're fans, and some of their backstories too. So, we're really looking forward to that this season as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Do that thing you do at the end of the podcast that I never know what to do.
I will do that, Kevin. So, as always, do us a big favor. If you're listening to us, watching us on YouTube, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share, all that good stuff, so we can grow this Buffalo End Zone podcast, bring you some fun, some news about the Bills, poke fun at Kevin a little bit, all those sorts of things, and have a good time.